Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you are listening. And whether you're listening or watching, I appreciate you joining us. I got some nice feedback in the first couple episodes. A couple of you said, Jay, you got a voice for radio, which I took as, Jay, you got a face for radio. So if you choose to just, listen on your podcast app and not be watching on YouTube, then I don't blame you. But I do appreciate you joining us for today's episode, episode 3. It's going to be about the hurdles for apartment builders. We'll be talking about what's going on with apartment starts, and then we'll be bringing in my friend Payton Mayes, the CEO of JPI, one of the nation's largest developers and very active across Texas and Southern California. So that's going to be a great conversation. Definitely stay tuned for that one. Before we get into it, I want to give a big thanks to our sponsor, Madera Residential. Check them out at maderaresidential.com. All right, so let's get into it. Here's a chart, and I know not everybody can see these things, but I'll at least be able to talk you through it. I got a few I want to show you today that's all about supply and where it's going. This first one's going to show you supply is peaking this year. Most of you know this already if you're in the industry. More than 600,000 units scheduled to complete this year. That's going to be the highest since the mid-1970s. It's going to drop off next year. Really, first half of next year, still quite a bit. By second half of next year, should thin out more. And then at this point, it's really looking like the 26, 27 timeframe could be significantly less, looking more like the early 2010s timeframe coming out of the GFC than it really does to a pre-COVID period. And here's why we have confidence in this. I tell people all the time is, forecasting is an inexact science, but the one thing you could have some confidence around is supply, because it just starts that are pushed forward. So here's what's going on with starts. In 2024 year to date, we have the largest gap between starts and completions going back to when census tracking started in 1968, meaning we've completed about 169,000 more units than we've started so far this year. And so that's why we have pretty good confidence that these numbers are going to really drop off. Now, what's really interesting is this is happening all over the country, not just in these higher supplied markets in the mountain region and the Sun Belt. It's really everywhere. Now, of course, we do see it. Take the most extreme example. Philadelphia is down 80% from its peak, about 5,000 units permitted for multifamily over the last 12 months. Again, that's down about 80%. That's the biggest drop in the country. But some of these hot construction markets, you can see right in the middle in the 40, 50, 60% range, we have Dallas, DC, Atlanta, Raleigh, Orlando, Salt Lake City, Denver, Nashville, Houston, which really hadn't even built that much compared to their Texas markets. A couple maybe surprises, Phoenix and Austin down only 20-25%. I think some of those permits might not be translating to starts though. And then on the top of this chart, you see places like Milwaukee or Pittsburgh, they haven't declined much, but they also really weren't building much. So really, even in most of these Midwest markets, you see, for example, places like Cleveland, Kansas City, and others where the numbers weren't very big to begin with, and they're still down pretty substantially. So the challenges facing developers for the most part are challenges that they're facing across the country. They're macro factors, not just local, high supply, challenging lease up factors. One more thing on this, if you can see the screen, and if not, I'll walk you through this. Top reasons for slowdown in apartment construction starts. I actually shared this one on the first podcast as well, but I'm going to bring it back. It's from a National Multifamily Housing Council's survey of developers and builders, asking them, hey, for those of you experiencing delays, what are the drivers? Number one driver, not a surprise, in delays, project is not economically feasible at this time, 77%. And that just means it doesn't pencil out, or in layman's terms, it means that, we can't get the revenue to justify the costs for this project. And the revenue is basically the rent and the demand for that unit at that rent level. And so the costs have gone up. Obviously, construction costs have been pretty sticky at this point. They're still way above pre-COVID levels. You have some materials like lumber have gotten cheaper, but that doesn't offset other factors. Of course, cost of debt has gone up substantially, which means you're paying more each month for that mortgage, and on down the list. At the same time, you have rents that are flat to falling in most of these markets. So that's a very challenging formula for developers right now. So we're going to talk to Payton Mayes in a little bit about how to navigate through this environment where it's increasingly challenging to get starts done. But it is important to kind of set that landscape or the foundation here for the challenging market, because we've quickly gone from probably the most favorable landscape for apartment developers in their lifetimes to now perhaps the most challenging, and one that could be the most challenging, at least outside of the great financial crisis. All right, let's get into rental housing trivia. This is where I give you some fancy tidbits, take to your next happy hour and impress all of your friends. Of course, I say that sarcastically, but hey, we all love this stuff, right? That's why you're here. Here's today's trivia question. Who is the largest owner of build-to-rent single-family rental homes in the U.S., according to John Burns Research and Consulting? All right, so give that some thought. I'll give you a hint. This one company owns about 3 times more than the next largest owner. So not a trick question here. If you know this space, there's one clear market leader in terms of BTR units owned. Next thing, in the news is where we get to review some of the headlines related to the rental housing industry. First one, this is from CRE Daily, 2Q24 Burns and CRE Daily, Fear and Greed Index, the worst is over. CRE investors believe the worst of the market downturn is behind them in the latest issue of the CRE Daily's Fear and Greed Index. All right, not a big fan of the name of this index, Fear and Greed. That's a little extreme, but what's really interesting about the data itself, and by the way, it says Q2, but it's actually, this was done in August and September, and they're asking investors about basically their appetite for commercial real estate. And so one of the things we've seen is that from the survey, it showed that we now have more investors looking to buy multifamily, be net buyers than net sellers. And so the appetite's improving. And part of that's just because there's increasingly a view that the market has bottomed. The various providers of price indices have shown data showing that cap rates appear to be flattening out. This is more confident where rates are going, still strong appetite for especially high quality multifamily real estate. So with that, it looks like these people are saying they're ready to buy. So we'll see if that plays out, because some of the prognosticators, including myself, thought we'd already see bigger pickup in sales activity than we have. Second headline. This is from the U.S. Census. This is from their own news release. Incomes keeping up with rent increases. Now, some of you may have seen the data released a couple of weeks ago from the census showing about half of Americans are rent burdened. Half of American renting households are rent burdened. And that's a very serious, obviously challenging topic. I wrote about this extensively on X and on LinkedIn in a lot more depth, but there's a secondary headline here saying incomes keeping up with rent increases. I'm going to read a little bit of this to you. The fact that the gross rent share of income did not rise nationally, meaning that people continue to spend the same share of income on rent. Nationally for census data, it's about 31%, which is 7 or 8 percentage points, I should say, above what we see in most of the private sector in terms of the REITs and institutional market. So the fact that they did not rise nationally and in most states, despite significant increases in rental costs, could be due to higher renters' incomes or to an increase in higher income households joining the population of renters. So I could spend a lot more time talking about this. So basically what it's saying is, hey, number one, it looks like renters are seeing better income growth than homeowners. That kind of aligns with data showing better wage growth among younger workers and older workers. And then secondarily, we've seen we've seen higher income renters joining the renter pool, or at least staying in the renter pool as their incomes have gone up. So a couple of factors there. Obviously, people waiting longer to get married and have kids, that keeps them in the rental pool longer. Those are typically drivers to buy a house. And obviously also it's a challenging market to be a buyer right now. And so those factors are bringing a lot more higher income renters into the market. Now, one thing I'll point out too is that this is not just a recent phenomenon tied to mortgage rates. A lot of people think this, but it's not. You go back over the last decade, Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies has some great research showing that 3/4 of all net new renter households have incomes above $75,000 a year. And of those, they generally see a lot less issues in terms of distress. They're more likely to pay their rent. They're less likely to be rent burdened. So some good nuance there. I don't want to take away from the real needs of the lower end of the market, but certainly an interesting story at the high end. All right, next headline, Business Insider. A record number of apartments are getting built this year. That's great news for real estate affordability. All right, so I like that this is being properly framed here. We are at, I talked about this a few minutes ago, we're at record numbers in terms of supply, or at least 50-year high in supply, and that's putting downward pressure on rents all across the country, but especially in these higher supplied markets. There's been a clear relationship between where supply is going in very big numbers and the impact that's having on rents. And so as we think about kind of policy solutions for affordability, it's a good reminder that it's all about supply, but it's going to be a more challenging environment to build supply. And that leads into the last headline we'll touch on today. NBC News, politicians are promising housing help. Home builders say the problems are many and the solutions scant. home builders across the country say they've struggled to keep up with the growing demand amid rising costs, a shortage of workers, and increasing building restrictions. All right, so both presidential candidates talking about housing right now. Love to see housing in the spotlight. We've seen the various proposals. But what's interesting is that while we see a lot of enthusiasm one way or the other from YIMBY groups and from, in some cases, individuals who want to be home buyers, there's been a very tepid response from the people who actually build the housing, both for single-family homes and for apartments. And I think this probably isn't getting the coverage it deserves, because at the end of the day, it's like we need buy-in from people who actually build these housing units, and they have to believe this is going to work, and they have to participate in it. Unfortunately, number one, housing is local. There's only so much the federal government can do to incentivize, the municipalities to reform zoning and entitlement issues and regulatory costs that really burden construction and new starts. But second of all, the cost side really doesn't get enough discussion. It's expensive to build housing. Typically now what we're seeing is if you want to build a 250 unit apartment complex, you're going to get 50 to 60% of that through debt, but you still have to raise, just round numbers, $20 to $40 million in equity. I mean, these are big checks. And then you need that to be able to pencil out where you can get the rents that you need to then justify that cost. And again, that's a very challenging equation right now. So good to see it being talked about, but I'm personally not very optimistic that we're going to see a meaningful change in the direction of housing starts, regardless of who wins the election, barring some other type of very significant change. One more thing on construction. We have a section on this for our podcast called New Digs. And this is when we get to highlight a cool construction project happening somewhere in the country. And today we're going to Phoenix, Arizona. A North Phoenix office park will be converted to apartments. Got a picture of this office park on the screen here. It's 2 buildings. Investment group Caliber Companies bought what was a Class A office complex that apparently was doing well, according to their article, pre-COVID, but has not since then. And they're hoping to start conversion work next summer if all goes well with the permitting and entitlement process. And their hope is this could eventually be up to 700 units. So, I've been one that's not been super enthusiastic about or super optimistic, I should say, about the outlook for office conversions to apartments, just because they're very hard to do. They're very expensive. And most of these deals are, better in theory than in reality. But got to give credit where credit is due. So I hope that Caliber is able to pull this off. They certainly are very cool and unique projects when and where they do happen. All right, next section we're getting into is the complaints department. This is where I get to address some comments and complaints that I get through social media and other channels. I don't get a chance to read and review all of it, but sometimes I see something I think that, maybe, negative in tone, but it really hits on a common misconception about rental housing. So I do like to cover this where I can. And today's one, I was talking about affordability, and I had somebody on X, right? Deport 20 million of illegals. There was no affordability crisis prior to 2020. All right, so we're seeing a lot of this right now, the nature of the political season that we're in. Certainly, the immigration topic is one that's really getting, I think, misunderstood. First and foremost, obviously, the more people we have, the more pressure that puts on housing. We need more housing, absolutely. But to say that this is a recent phenomenon is absolutely false. We, in terms of the housing affordability crisis, I should say, there was an affordability crisis prior to 2020. And speaking especially to what's happening in the rental housing market, is we've seen decades of underbuilding that's really made it challenging to find quality affordable housing. In fact, again, I mentioned the Harvard study earlier. Harvard has some great research showing the decline in low rent rental housing over the last few decades. So it's a real issue, and it's about much more than just immigration. And last thing to point out is that some data from the National Association of Home Builders shows that more than 30% of construction workers are immigrants, and in some trade sectors that can be 40-50%. And so it kind of goes both ways here. So we do rely on immigrants to help build these homes, and so we do need that workforce in place to continue adding supply, because sometimes the supply from 50 years ago isn't located or in the condition of today's households who are looking to buy or rent a house. So we still need new housing even in slower growth markets. All right, let's get back to rental housing trivia. Who is the largest owner of build-to-rent single-family rental homes in the U.S., according to John Burns Research and Consulting? All right, so put your thinking hats on. I told you this one has about 3x more than the next biggest owner, according to John Burns, and the answer is Redwood Living, based in the great state of Ohio, in the Cleveland area. So Redwood, an early pioneer in the BTR space, and continue to be very active across the Midwest and the Sun Belt. And with that, we're going to jump into the interview segment of today's podcast, where I welcome my friend Payton Mayes. All right, and now we enter the interview portion of today's podcast, and I am thrilled to be joined by my friend Payton Mayes, the CEO of JPI. JPI is the largest developer in the nation's most active construction market and also fastest growing in terms of population growth, DFW, and also active in Southern California. So Payton, first of all, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be here. As I said, I listened to the first two episodes on the way out to the ranch, and job well done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Well, excited to have you on and talking apartment development. Payton, as you know, we're going from a period where apartment construction has been at record highs, starts are way down. We've talked earlier in this podcast about some of the headwinds facing developers right now: higher cost of debt, slower lease-up velocity thanks to this surge of supply, falling rents in many of these higher supplied markets, sticky construction costs, insurance, taxes. I'm sure probably reminding you too many things you don't want to hear about right now. But these macro factors impact everyone of all sizes. So how does JPI stay active, starting new projects in this type of environment?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I remind our team all the time that these factors that you just mentioned, it impacts everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a competitive advantage for the more established developers like JPI and some of our peers out there that have been in the markets through thick and thin, have seen the different cycles. And a lot of I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, when our land chase team was out searching for land and trying to make offers on what we thought were the best risk-adjusted returns, we would see some competitors, newer competitors, bid sometimes double what we were on the land. Like, what? How are they doing this? And I think that the multifamily market is obviously extremely attractive in the real estate food groups, and you had a lot of new entrants over the past 5, 10, 15 years that come in, and it's like, well, this is easy. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, I think that this more challenging capital markets environment has I'm gonna say flushed some of those players out, but has made it more difficult, where really the way it should be is the stronger developers that have more of a track record are the ones that are able to get projects capitalized. And so it's definitely been it hasn't been easy by any sense, but I think in these times the larger developers can tend to gain market share. The same thing you saw in the single family space during the great financial crisis is the large guys like the D.R. Hortons, the Lennars, et cetera. They their production dipped, but they grew market share. And that's our goal at the end of the day, is regardless of what the market environment is, we want to outperform the market.
Absolutely. And as you know, apartment development is such a localized business. So there's obviously a few national big players, but for the most part, it's very local. I agree. I think we're going to see some consolidation. And obviously, Payton, one reason the bigger players like JPI are able to do this is efficiencies of scale. One thing I know about you and JPI is you've been very focused on the cost side, and construction historically has not been the most efficient business.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little about some of the creative ways that JPI is finding to reduce costs and make these projects pencil out that otherwise might not.
Yeah, So, and I didn't grow up in the construction industry. I've been involved in real estate my whole life, and on the construction side, though, really started unpacking this with some development stuff that Molly, our CFO, and I did in Brazil 15 years ago, and then throughout other companies, and then really with JPI, with our in-house GC, getting more familiar with the inefficiencies in the construction industry. It's amazing. There's I can't remember what the entity is that kind of says this, but of the 22 different industries that someone tracked as far as efficiency, construction is the next to last efficient compared, and agriculture is last. And there's things changing though, and so we are I'd say an early adopter of using some of this technology that's been out there for a while, but hasn't necessarily been used in the residential construction space. Maybe it's more, it's more used in hospitals and complicated mixed use things as well. So we've added some amazing talent to our team over the past 2 or 3 years that is world class. And I'd say our approach is based on 3 pillars. One is insourcing. JPI is already we developer and GC, so we do all our own GC stuff. But in addition to our general contractor, we are starting to insource some of our design and some of the key trades that really where pace is set. And so on the design side, we've seen that the industry itself has a labor issue, and there's a lot of great architects out there. But during the great financial crisis, that profession got hit, and there's just we pay a lot of money for these plans, and there's constantly mistakes, et cetera, and nothing's ever going to be perfect. But the cost to the schedule, et cetera, from our contractor side, having to fix that stuff is a lot. And so we're insourcing all of that, and again, standardizing. Another thing we're doing is kind of integrating, so insourcing and then integrating all this under one structure, and planning, industrializing it. So again, we're all singing from the same hymnal, and again, using technology where everything talks to each other. And a lot of other industries do this. We just haven't done it that well in the construction space. So we're very early into this, but we've seen some very positive momentum, and excited about, I think we're just scratching the surface and excited about what's ahead.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And obviously that's very critical to get more housing built given the challenges right now we talked about. So I imagine some of the profile of the projects that pencil out these days has probably changed a little bit. So talk to us a little about what's working right now, what's penciling out, what's typical profile for these new starts that are happening right now or looking into next year, and how does that change versus what you saw in the past couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, so in Texas, we tend to, and this is, I'd say probably it's been the case for the last 4 or 5 years, but we tend to be more suburban focused. Not the urban high rise. We say that we're very agnostic as far as what we like. We like the best risk adjusted returns, and if that deal's in Frisco, well, great. If it's in Arlington, great. We don't have favorite cities. There's certainly some that are easier to work with than others, but we always want the best risk adjusted returns. So again, it tends to be walk up product. Not always, but tends to be walk-up product. And a lot of what we've done here in Texas has been has had some type of public-private partnership component to it that I know we may get into later. That serves residents that we haven't traditionally served in the past. So that's been an important part. In California, in Southern California, our operations out there have tended to we're focused in markets that have just a dearth of supply, new supply, and there's been some state pressure on some of these local municipalities to relax their zoning laws, and we've seen some positive impact from that. And again, we've got a few deals in the pipeline that are great deals. But there hasn't been anything new built in some cases a couple of decades. So comps are hard, but we know that when it costs 2 to 2.5x to buy a place, as what we're building a amazing multifamily community for, we're bullish on those.
Yeah, there's good value there. So Payton, you alluded to some of the new structures you're looking at in Texas, and in particular, I imagine these are programs that are some sort of benefit or subsidy or tax credit for attainable middle income and also affordable housing. So talk to us a little about how these projects work, given that it's a lower rent, but also I imagine the costs are pretty similar.
Yeah, the cost, I mean, as far as construction costs go, what we're building on our, what we call workforce housing, attainable housing, is it's the same as as what we have built on market rate side. So
a lot of people don't understand that.
A lot of people don't understand it. Our first pure tax credit project was a project in Balch Springs, just southeast of Dallas. And our equity partner on that project had said that, man, and they've done a lot. They've done, they're a big player across the United States. They said that's the nicest project that they've ever seen as far as construction. So we take a lot of pride in that, is that we're not going to dumb down, we're not going to dumb down the quality of what we build, for the rents. So how do we do it? Yeah, number one, I think working in municipalities that understand the need for it, and where they want their teachers and firefighters and policemen to be able to live in the communities that they serve and not have to travel, hour and a half plus to serve those communities. And so, we're a strong believer that the only thing that's going to solve this affordable housing issue is supply.
Amen.
And math is math. And if a few years ago you could have potentially done some of this without these structures, but with the cost of capital, the cost of construction, you have to have some sort of partnership in order to make the numbers work.
Yeah. No, I tell people all the time, I say, hey, look, just because you want to build affordable doesn't mean the land sellers selling for cheaper. It doesn't mean that your construction workers are going to work for cheaper. It doesn't mean the materials are going to be cheaper. Yep. So it's hard to do. And I think people don't realize sometimes that, the finish out alone isn't really drives the rent.
Exactly. Yeah, the 2x4 costs what a 2x4 costs.
Yeah. All right. So, there's, Payton, here in Texas, there's been an ongoing effort to, originally this PFC structure was created to help stimulate more attainable middle income and affordable housing. In recent years, we've seen more and more push to further restrict what it can and cannot do. And some of it may be some common sense reforms, but I think I worry a little bit about maybe going too far and ultimately restricting the volume of what's going to get built and ultimately kind of undermining the initial intent. Is that something you're worried about at all?
Yeah, I mean, last, I guess in 2023, when the Texas legislature meets every 2 years, and 2023 during that session, we got pretty involved, during that process, and speaking to different representatives to try to explain. The system was being abused. Yeah. And in some cases, we had properties, or let's say the state had properties that were, taken, off the tax rolls that really weren't, and that system wasn't providing a meaningful public good. And we're not against, the structure at all, but in some cases it was being abused. And so what we tried to voice is, hey, let's be transparent on how everything works, and let's be transparent and show people this is the public good, and this is how much rents are less than what the market is. And so I think we were again, we're developers. And we think supply, I'm biased, but I think, it's supply demand. The only thing that's going to help the affordable housing issue is new supply. Right. And it's new supply everywhere, right? It's not just the affordable stuff, but I'm cautiously optimistic that our representatives understand that new supply is key. And anything that they do to restrict new supply is counter. It's just counter to our goal.
Yeah, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. But again, I worry about that a little bit. But to your point, there was some obvious abuse of it as well that had to be curtailed. So let's talk a little more about policy topics. Obviously, housing construction has now become, it feels like overnight, it's become a major political issue, even at the presidential campaign level. We hear the candidates, actually both of them, talking to various degrees of different languages about reforming zoning, removing regulatory roadblocks to new housing construction. But at the end of the day, obviously housing is a very local issue. There's only so much the federal government can really do about these things. So of all the cities and towns that JPI works with, and I know you don't want to name names here, but just can you give us some ideas of, what do the best ones do to help facilitate more construction?
Yeah, I would say, the best ones, number one, will engage with you and have a conversation with you. The best ones, also on the permitting side, permits, we did a study with some of our construction projects and looked at, okay, how we're trying to reduce the amount of, quote unquote, dead time where nothing's happening in the unit when things are being built. And even if you're able to significantly, where something's happening in the unit all the time, there's still a lot of delay with waiting on inspectors.
Yeah.
And so inspections, permits, having cities that are thinking forward and allowing us to work with high quality, independent third-party inspectors, that's been a huge benefit that we've seen. And again, kind of just back on the political side, I think having mayors and city councilmen, P&Z folks, et cetera, having them engage, and when you have a resident that it doesn't matter what you're building is just going to be against you, having them recognize that and do what's right for the city that they represent, and not necessarily what's right to get elected into the next in the next election. That's been key, and I think it was 5 years ago at JPI when we decided to lean more into the affordable housing space. For 30 years, JPI had been a market rate developer, but we kind of looked at the situation. I had some affordable housing experience up in my time in New York, where there's all kinds of different state and city, and federal programs. So what industry is there out? Our Republicans and Democrats can't really agree on anything, but this is something they do agree on. Is we have an issue, and we need to figure out how to make it work, because it's not good for anyone if people can't afford where they live. And so I'm again cautiously optimistic that over time, when good developers that are transparent and do what they say they'll do, when folks look at that track record, I think they'll be more open-minded to having a conversation.
I agree, and you made a good point about every time you propose a new, not just JPI, but anybody proposes new apartments, we hear the same old tropes. It's, hey, this is going to bring crime, it's going to increase traffic, this is going to overcrowd our schools. And you made a good point about when you have city officials, whether it's city staff or elected officials at or appointed officials at P&Z, if they're willing to stand up and say, hey guys, let's get to the facts right. 'Cause otherwise, if it's just the out-of-town developer saying it, then no one's going to believe you. You got to be able to support the facts.
Yeah, and I think one thing, the quality of I encourage folks that haven't seen a new multifamily community, and I define new over the past 5-10 years, haven't seen one, and they have in their mind maybe something that they lived in the 70s or 80s in college. The quality of construction today is light years ahead of what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And, I live in South Lake, and, I'm, folks that, from DFW, they know that, South Lake is anti-density. Yeah. And I am always on a, crusade to say, let's focus on quality and not density. There is some, I'm quality above density is to me, what we should focus on.
Well, and to your point, even in places like Balch Springs, as you mentioned, I think you'll be blown away with the quality of what you're building.
Yeah.
Payton, if I could ask you another question, think about the future, JPI. You recently announced Austin and Houston as expansion markets, and could you mind just sharing a little bit kind of your vision for JPI in these coming years?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we were, as some folks know, we were blessed. Actually, it was yesterday on September 29th, 2023, we signed a membership purchase agreement where Molly and I teamed up with Sumitomo Forestry to acquire the operating platform from the former owner of JPI, who did an amazing job of building a company that folks that JPI is well known in the industry, and just the culture that we continue to try to evolve and keep what makes JPI special. We were very blessed to do that, and with Sumitomo's with their help And with some new talent that we've added, we're very bullish on the industry. Yeah, we've come from where starts, it may take years for starts to get where they were, but we still need housing. And we firmly believe that the market is so fragmented. The top 10 single family builders in the country are about 60% of that overall market. The top 10 multifamily developers, about 15%.
Yeah.
So it's very, very fragmented. And we believe that, with our system, we're, poised to grow. And yeah, I think Austin and Houston, we're really going back there. JPI has been there in the past. JPI has been in, I think, 26 states in the past. But different than a lot of our peers is that when we go into a market, our goal is to be like Dallas-Fort Worth. We, are by far the largest in that market. We think there's lots of efficiencies on our land chase side, our just knowledge of that market, the construction side, scale, et cetera. So yeah, we're excited. Our stated goal is to be the number one multifamily developer and builder in the U.S.
Congratulations, Payton. Hope you get there. Well,
yeah.
And thank you so
Lord
much.
willing, we will.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jay.
And after a quick wardrobe change, that wraps up the third edition of the Rent Roll podcast sponsored by Madera Residential. Again, a big thank you to Payton Mayes for joining us for the interview. I hope you enjoyed his insights, and certainly one worth following as they continue to grow the JPI platform. And thank you to each of you for joining us today. Thank you to Madera, our sponsor, and hope to see you next time.